أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله الحمد لله بسم الله. I was just saying before I began this video, I was saying to someone who watches these videos and tweaks the details technically for me, I was saying that I just did a whole video with the intention of speaking to any of you watching this video, but I forgot to hit to click the record button. So, well, I had my batteries in place and the lights right, and everything was focused, everything was there. That long thing just went into space, or it went into my own hearing, so I heard it for myself, which is worth something. So, in that I said that I have to develop in myself something that we have built into us by Allah, which is this natural ability to reset our nervous system, to recalibrate and refocus, tune in, get everything in order. One person used the metaphor, and I don't like to use metaphors for machinery and things like computers and cars, but someone said, you know, an airplane before it takes off, they check all the systems, this system, that system. And our nervous system does the same thing in our sleep. And before we wake up, after we've gotten to deep sleep, our system goes through all of our different systems checks. Is this working right? Is this working right? Is that working right? Is that all the hormonal aspects, all the other things that we need that are so complex in the complexity of the self and the complexity of that very thing that enables us to have consciousness, to live in the world with action and exchange and converse and interact with the world, that complex system. And that points to something too that, you know, the importance of sleep, and sleep that's deep enough, not long enough, and definitely not sleep that's just simply brought about by sleeping pills or other methods and techniques to get to sleep. We need to have something that's beyond REM sleep, that is beyond our dream sleep, that's deep, in which we reconstruct, we rebuild parts of the system, rebuild, so we're learning now, we rebuild things in our genetic expression, the arena of our genetic expression. We rebuild those things, and we rebuild and recalibrate things that we need to have to wake up refreshed and ready to go in the world the next day. So sleep is important. And for myself, I need to make a chest, because I'm not sleeping before I do these videos, and it doesn't happen automatically by Allah's design. What Allah has designed into us, I'll reiterate that. At this moment, in me and in you are not 1,000 things, 1,000,000 things, but really things beyond number. Things beyond number. Processes, activities, extraordinary things. We will go on. Right at this moment across the world, we can be pretty sure there are people who are biologists, medical people, scientists, and other kinds of investigators and explorers and discoverers of all sorts that are discovering something, and they have these moments of, aha, this is what I was looking for. This is the question I had, and this is the answer to it. And a new scientific discovery in some cases, a new insight into something, the discovery of a new thing that happens in the brain or in the body. I mean, 100 years ago, we didn't know about many things that happen in the brain and in the body, in the nervous system, the chemicals that take place, that are active and do things in the body, the hormonal things that take place, and how that works, and that will go on, and that will go on and on and on, and there will be no end to it, because again, what we're examining here in the body and the self is a universe. And by the same token, that's why we have in the world, with due respect to all of them with their good intentions of healing, and they do good work. Don't get me wrong, people also often misunderstand when I say something about psychologists that I'm criticizing and I don't recognize. No, of course I recognize their good work. But we will find at any time thousands of different therapies, methods for healing and dealing with self. And of those thousands, within those thousands, there will be tens of thousands of people who will be advocates for it, saying, I did this therapy and I did this one, I did this tapping, I did this, I did Gestalt, I did co-counseling, I did this thing, I did breathing, I did all these things. Thousands, tens of thousands of people who will have, they will speak out of the benefit and how it changed them for the better. And that is only an indication of the vastness of the self. And we could go on discovering new methods. I remember reading about this German psychiatrist, I think he was, who worked with schizophrenic and discovered with these schizophrenics that if he taught them German first, now I don't know how he did that, but if he taught them German first, he'd have a greater opportunity for connecting with them and finding changes in them. Something to be said for, there's a lot of new research on what it means to learn more than one language. And certainly I remember, and I've known a lot of the scholars that I've heard speak about what it means to learn Arabic. And Arabic, not just in terms of the foreign language from certain countries, Arab countries, but Arabic, the Arab language, that is a language that's coherent and consistent with all of its parts relating to one another, other than the language that we speak, that I'm speaking to you now, which is the Ajami, the confused language in which I have things from Greek, and I have things from French, and I have things from other languages, and we don't, some things, words that I don't even know where they came from. And it's all mashed together, and we do our best to make sense of it, to make coherence in it. But it's a lot harder than Arabic. I remember being with Hamza Yusuf, Allah bless him, and he'd come back from studying Arabic deeply, and we were having a conversation. It was on the street in Santa Barbara, I remember the very day, and I was listening to him, and I realized that something had changed in him. And what had changed was his way of thinking. And I realized that it was probably because he had become fluent in Arabic. And I said, Hamza, I think you've become Arab. And I meant, you've become clear in a different way. And his thinking and his lineage, the line of thinking was different than he'd had before. So the kind of language in our language is relevant, of course, to how we think and how we hold ourselves in the world, and things that we don't even realize. Alfred Tomatis, I mentioned it in another video, earlier one from this one, I believe, depending upon how you all receive these, who studied the ear and hearing. And he said, that the language you speak is very important in terms of the physiological response we have, but he says that language is also relevant, and the kind of language comes also out of a coherence, and this is really interesting, the coherence with the geography of a place. The language French comes out of France itself, and the Arab languages in Arab countries different in Egypt than it is in Damascus, and so on and so forth. The Spanish from Mexico, very different from the Spanish in Spain, and so on, in the northern Spain and southern Spain, and all of these things. The southern language. I remember one of my teachers in Fez. He had this ability to take on the accents of various Moroccans. And I remember he was sitting with a bunch of Moroccans, and I couldn't follow it, but he was speaking with an accent from Moroccans from different parts of, and these people were just cracking up, hearing, he'd say, well, this person's from, like I would say, this person was from the south, so they pronounced right more like rat, or rat now, that kind of thing. We know these things, and we often laugh at it. But there's a deeper meaning in all these things, and the deeper meaning, I would suggest, is how these things in ourselves are all interconnected. And these interconnectedness of our language, our vocabulary, where we were educated, what our backgrounds were, all these things we carry with us in certain ways, and the gestures we make, the movement we make, how we sit in our body and how we live in our bodies and so forth, and the customs that we've inherited and the customs that we've kept with us, or that we follow, and they adapt, the behavioral patterns. All of these things are important in terms of making up the self, and add to this thing that I'm underlining here today, which is the complexity, the extraordinary complexity of the self. I send out these documents to people to fill out, and it's a timeline of their history, their health history, and a sort of symptom picture of things they find difficult, in sort of other qualities that are subjective, not necessarily pathological, about them. And I use those to determine homeopathic remedies that I can choose for them and suggest. And I got one back from one woman, and she said, I said to her, because it was very detailed, very amazing. I mean, I could really study it and say, well, this is probably the remedy she's going to need, because all the details that I needed, subjective and otherwise, were there. And I said, oh, it's very detailed, that documents you sent. And I want to thank you for that. And she said, well, I know, I'm a very complex person. And I said, right. That part, no, hold to that part, you got it, hold to that and go with it. And go with the principle that complexity, while at times and where you're at in life might seem like an obstacle, the complexity of all those things you've taken in are in fact also the indication of not only the complex, but the vastness of your resources within you, that when you begin to find coherence and harmony, they come together to inform you in every moment, to inform yourself and to bring forth things that you didn't realize you had capable in you. And I would say that brilliance, genius, deep wisdom, all of these things are capable for someone who develops this coherence and harmony in the self. And that big part of that is just simply accepting the self. Accepting that what I've got, it doesn't mean I'm not ready for change, doesn't mean I don't need change, and I don't need to find coherence and integration of all these parts. But those terrible things that happened in school, the bully or the other schoolmates, and the things that happened at home that were so painful, and other things that happened through your lives, these things are all resources in you when you not just accepting them and submit to them and recognizing that they came from Allah. Yes, that's an important part. All came from Allah. But when you be able to integrate them in yourself, and that's back to this exercise that I've given, paying attention to the sensation in your body. And that with the 3 W's, what do I notice in my body? Where do I notice? And what next as I pay attention to that? And as I said before in another earlier video, if those changes and those sensations you find changing, like you recall certain things, or something difficult happens and you feel something in your stomach. One 8-year-old girl I was doing this with, children understand this as well. They understand it better than adults in some cases. The 8-year-old girl, when she was telling me about her bully that she was experiencing in school, I said, well, what do you notice in your body? She says, I feel a tornado in my stomach. When that tornado in her stomach or in our stomachs, when it moves up to the chest, or in the chest it moves to the stomach, or from there it moves into the arms, or moves up into the face, or the back of the neck, the jaw, the face, anything at all, that movement is an indication of what I said earlier, which all sensation has process connected to it. One of the examples I give is when I was a science teacher. I taught science for several years to teenagers. And one of the examples and one of the experiments I would do with them was I would have them touch something metal or something solid wood and something cloth and something like metal, and I'd ask them, what's coldest? And they'd say, oh, the metal's colder. And then I'd point out to them, no, in this room, with the temperature of the room and the climate, they're both the same temperature, but the sensation that we experience with the metal, because the heat is moving out of our hands into the cold metal, that is process. And that's another example, that's what I use as an example of sensation having a process connected to it. When we're standing and we're doing this work, the somatic work, and we're moving from our body and what we're feeling in our body, and suddenly people will say to me, my body suddenly feels heavy. Well, your body is heavy. To feel it and tune into that is being more present in your body. That doesn't mean we consciously stop all the time and say, how much is my body weight? No, these things happen unconsciously by either having presence in our bodies or dissociation from our bodies, not being present. And as I said before, again and again, the Prophet ﷺ was considered to be the most present of human beings, which enabled him to be Rahmat al-Alameen for one, but also have compassion for whomever came to him, and empathy and connection, and could see beyond their limitations by being who he was, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the same is true for us. The more we we pay attention to the sensations in our body, the more we develop and recover what it's like to be in our body, that time, to be present in our body in the way that we were when we were young and we saw something exciting and we jump up and down and say, oh, and then we want to share it with someone, run to say, look, come and look at this, come and look at this, with that enthusiasm. We want to sustain that enthusiasm because every moment of every day and every minute in our lives, Allah is presenting us with a new world that He is recreating every moment in time. Every moment He is on a new thing, and that new thing, we want it to be new for us. We want it to be exciting. One of the recent memories I have is from someone I worked with many years ago, and it was a woman, and we were talking about this becoming more present and how we can learn this from children who have a great deal of presence. We could simply learn it by observing them, because like I was saying, we learn from humans humanness. And we learn from animals about our animal natures by the same token. And we learn from Allah's creation all the qualities of trees and stones and His mountains and all of this. If we're with it and if we reflect upon it as we're guided to do in Quran. But this woman said, you know, my son was every morning, before he'd come for breakfast in the kitchen, he'd go open the kitchen door and he'd stand there on the doorstep. And I could see he was taking a couple of breaths. And I said to him, I said to him, what are you doing? And he said, I'm smelling the world. And he'd do that every morning. And she said, well, what does it smell like? And he turned to her with a big smile and said, it smells like fun. So remember that, and remember that we learn from the ones with vitality and enthusiasm, and if we pay attention. And we also learn, conversely, in the negative sense, we learn from the people who are bitter and angry, and we want to try to lift them out of their anger and their bitterness and give them as much as we can from what we have of these resources of delight, joy, hamd and shukr in us, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.